Welcome to a new chapter, and this is chapter 9, Communication in a Digital Age. And communication is one of the most important soft skills that we have talked about. Remember that OB is more concerned with the soft skills that you acquired. And in business school, communication, both verbally and written, are one of the most important skills that we assess and make sure that students can really, perfect before they graduate. It's one of our learning outcomes, so to speak. So what are we going to answer in this chapter? We're going to talk about what is the communication process and how we can make sure it's more effective. We're also going to talk about what are the key aspects to make sure that you are successful in interpersonal communication. And finally, we're going to talk about what are the key things that you can do to improve your presentation skills and crucial conversations and managing up. Okay, so let's move on to our first learning objective, which talks about the communication process. Okay, so before we talk about what communication process is, we have to first define what communication is. Okay, so communication is the sharing of information between two or more parties and any inferences that are drawn from this information that is communicated. Because remember, what you communicate to others might not be understood in the way that you have intended it. So sometimes I try to explain things in these lectures and they might not be either understood at all, and we hope that doesn't happen, so that's poor communication, or they're not understood in the manner that I had intended. Okay, so if we look at this is the communication process over here. There is usually a sender and there is a receiver, as well as a message that is transmitted in between, and then finally feedback that is sent from the receiver to the sender. So for example, this lecture is a form of communication, right? I'm the sender and you are the receiver. And the message is this lecture, and it's about communication, and it's transmitted through a specific medium, which in this case is the online format of this course. Okay, and then you and sometimes I receive feedback from you. Oh, this assignment didn't work. This exercise is not opening. I'm not sure I know what you mean by this. And if you notice, this feedback that I receive from you is a bit more difficult to gauge from my point of view relative to a physical face-to-face class, because I can't see the expressions on your face. The feedback is not instant. I have to wait for a little bit to see what happens. I can't really see if this is easy or difficult for you. Okay, so this is the communication process in a nutshell here. And finally, there's also noise, right? Noise is anything that can interfere in that kind of sort of communication. And the fact that you're not in front of me when I'm communicate this information creates noise. Because as I said, I can't see the expressions on your face. I can't see whether you understand it or not. There's no instant feedback. So that's kind of noise. Noise could also be like when you are from different cultures. I remember my wife telling me that when she was subbing for a teacher, someone told her that they needed to kick it up a notch. And she did not understand what that means because it's more of a colloquial phrase. And that's where, the noise can interfere over here, okay? So just a little bit more detail. So the communication process begins when the sender encodes the idea or thought, right? You have the idea inside of your brain and you want to encode it. You want to transform it into something that people can understand. So someone might, not understand the project guidelines that I put, and then they might tell me, encode it in a message and say, well, no one in the class understood the guidelines. Well, what he actually means is that, or intended to mean that, is that he or she did not understand those guidelines, but they're not allowed to look bad and therefore generalize it to everyone. That person might have sent it through an email. If it was a face-to-face class, they might have raised it inside of the classroom, right? Then there's decoding, there's understanding it. So if I were online, I would get that message and say, well, it seems like everyone in the class doesn't understand. So let me maybe record a video and try to explain the guidelines in a better way. And that would be the feedback that I give you, right? Or if it were in the classroom, I would ask him, what is it specifically that you don't understand about the project? And he might identify a specific portion, and therefore I can provide feedback on that. And then I can ask the entire class, are there any questions? So the feedback here will differ because there is two-way communication that is kind of quick. And as we said, there's sometimes noise, which could be differences in language, differences in culture, differences in standards of levels of education, which can sometimes lead to this. Sometimes some noise is, I've been teaching this for so long that sometimes things that I think are easy and intuitive are not easy and intuitive for a student who's seeing those for the first time. So that is noise that interferes with the understanding of the message. I said media, the medium in which we communicate that message, like whether we communicate it through email, online, through a presentation, will all affect whether people will understand your message or not, right? So as we said, that for face-to-face, feedback is really quick, right? There's a lot of rich communication because there's body language, there's voice, there's I can use a multimedia presentation behind me, all of that. Yeah, but online it becomes very restrictive, and that's sometimes why I'm very apprehensive about teaching online, because that sense of media richness does not exist. Let's talk about then, or test our knowledge. George is the CEO of Big Sky Travel Corporation. He needs to convey bad news to his employees, and the best medium to communicate the news is most likely. Okay. Which one is it? Is it A, email, B, text, C, face-to-face, D, a memo, and E, a telephone? Well, in this case, I would say it's C, face-to-face. If it's bad news, you just don't want to throw it out like a bomb out there and just not be able to gauge what your employees' reactions are. So that is not a good idea. I remember one time an email was sent from a university that I worked for, and in that email, they mentioned that several budget cuts would need to be made. And that email was sent right before the Christmas break. So imagine, the amount of turmoil that I might have created for people right before that Christmas break, just with an email.